The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads Podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Basketball is just organized chaos. So I want to see what happens to this individual in a controlled setting, but kind of implementing some chaos into the controlled setting at the same time, just to see how they move.
Xavier Brown is a performance specialist who specializes in basketball and volleyball sports performance. Originally going to school for a career in the medical field after reading Tim Grover's Relentless, Xavier's curiosity and love for basketball pushed him to dive into strength and conditioning in 2015. While not initially having a background in exercise science or any fitness experience outside of YouTube videos, Xavier went out and gained valuable first-hand experience as an intern at Plant High School in Tampa, Florida. From there, he began networking and quickly found himself as an intern at SportsEast Performance, and his final internship at his alma mater, the University of South Florida, with the men's and women's basketball programs. In January of 2018, Xavier decided to relocate to his hometown of Orlando, Florida. After finishing helping athletes in his hometown, he relocated to Cleveland to serve as a strength and conditioning coach at Lake Erie College, where he was responsible for over 500 athletes and their performance. Xavier also currently serves as a performance coach for Future Fit as of the year 2020. Xavier graduated from the University of South Florida in 2016 with his bachelor's in biological health sciences, and he's a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. If you have a chance to leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast app, we would really appreciate it. Tell your friends in the coaching community about the show and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. Check out hoopheadspod.com where you can listen to every episode we've ever recorded and find out more about what drives our show. Grab a pen and take some notes as you listen to this episode with sports performance specialist Xavier Brown. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here tonight without my co-host Jason Sunkel, who is taking care of his newborn daughter tonight. So we are pleased, though, to welcome to the podcast Xavier Brown, athletic performance coach. Xavier, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you for bringing me on here, and I appreciate the introduction and just the opportunity, man. I'm excited to get rolling with you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to diving into some basketball performance-related questions for you. Also getting to know a little bit about your background and how you came to be in the spots that you're in right now. So let's start out by going back in time to when you were a kid and talk a little bit about your athletic background. Tell us a little bit about what you did when you were a kid, why you fell in love with sports and basketball in particular.
Yeah, man. I mean, honestly, like as a kid, I played soccer. That was like my first sport. I think that's like everybody's first sport. Like,
Yep.
the parents just kind of put them on the field, let them run around. Even at a young age, that's all you really need to do, and then just kick a ball around. So soccer was my first sport. I was always really good at it. Let my mom tell you or tell the story. She'll tell you like, oh yeah, you could have gone and played, college and beyond. but I was just, my heart wasn't in it. Like I naturally, was naturally gifted at soccer, but I don't know what it was, but it just didn't. It wasn't my thing. I
You
actually
like
played
to score. You like to score once in a while, right?
Yeah, but the crazy thing is, man, and it's not even to toot my own horn, but like I was really good at scoring. So even though soccer is like generally like a 1 to 2 goal game, like I would, I was really good at scoring, and I didn't, I was always the fastest kid on the team. So they would just put me in the middle of the field and just say, "Hey, Xavier, just play defense, play offense." So
There you
I would
go.
just run around all day. So like, I would score goals, but it was just like, I don't know, man. I don't really know what it was. Maybe it's because it naturally came easy for me. I don't really know what it was, but with basketball, I played it, at the same time as soccer. I played a little bit of football, and basketball just naturally for me. I wasn't naturally good at it. Like it was just like I would actually have to go outside and practice. I remember, I think it was like I was in like second grade, first grade. It was like first, second grade. I actually played in like a YMCA league or whatever, and it's funny. I actually went the whole season. I don't think I scored a point. And it was like that Kobe Bryant story where he like played a whole season, scored like 2 points. Like
Yep.
I went the entire season and didn't score a point. And it got to a point once I got in middle school, like I would always play, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play in the team. Then seventh grade came, tryouts came, and I didn't make the team. And I'll never forget, I'm talking to my mom, like, oh yeah, no, a lot of people told me like they thought I was gonna make the team. Maybe they saw my name on the list. And she's like, nah, you didn't make the team. So it was kind of like that was the first time I would say like I would say like, I won't say failure, but it was the first time like I didn't, accomplish something that I set out to do. So naturally, like with my competitive spirit, I just got out and started practicing because I felt that feeling of not being picked, not being chosen, rejection. And I never wanted to feel that again. So I just started practicing, hard as I could, just going outside, dribbling, running the sprints in the street. Like I didn't even know what I was doing, but I just knew like I wanted to do anything I could possibly do to make sure like that didn't happen again. And next year ended up making the team, and it's weird like in the process of me like just working hard and just trying to make sure like I did whatever I could to make sure like I didn't feel that feeling again. It's like you fall in love with the process. And we talk about that all the time as coaches, and in basketball, like you always talk about, love the process, trust the process. And for me, I didn't realize it, but I'm like, man, like I really love getting out here and getting better. And so like eighth grade, I played, freshman year of high school played, and then like sophomore year is kind of where everything changed. So at this point, like I just naturally felt like, basketball is something I wanted to do in some capacity for the rest of my life. I wasn't sure if I was going to go pro. I wasn't sure if I was going to play college, but I just knew like I was going to be around the game, and I was going to try to maximize, my opportunities in any way I could. So sophomore year, I'm like just going crazy that entire summer. Like the first time I ever hit the weight room, I was lifting weights, didn't know what I was doing again. I was just like using every machine in there that I could possibly put my hands on. And junior year came back, was in better shape, great shape, and everyone's just like, "Oh, Xavier, like, yo, man, like, yo, you're pretty good." And so I'm thinking like, okay, cool. So senior year comes around, and I'm kind of thinking, okay, I don't have any offers. How can I play college basketball? That was kind of my thing. And so basically, at that time I'd been working on my game, learned the process of getting up early, working on ball handling, shooting, things like that. And I wanted to go play in Ohio with the small, like I think it was D3 at the time. It might be D2 at this point, but it's called Wilberforce, Ohio.
Yep.
Yep. So talked to the coach, emailed him back and forth, tried to send him some film, and he was like, hey, like, sure, like we'll have you come on as a preferred walk on, which means like they're not going to pay for anything.
Right.
You're gonna have to pay out of pocket. So I was like, all right, cool. So like at the time, I'm like practicing, getting ready, like okay, cool. Like I'm going up to Ohio. Ended up hurting my knee. So like really messed up my knee. Just kind of thinking like at the time, I'm like, okay, cool. Like how can I get back? Right? Like how can I make sure like I come back stronger? So I started reading kinesiology books, so exercise science. I started reading like strength conditioning. Personally, just because selfishly I wanted to make sure like that I could come back stronger, more explosive, things like that. And it's funny because like I would always find myself, in the gym early in the mornings, just doing whatever I could to make sure that I could, be like the best player that I could possibly be. And another player actually saw me in the gym early mornings, and so he kind of came up to me and was like, "Hey man, can we work out together? Like, it'd be really cool if like we just train together." And so I'm like, "Yeah, sure, like whatever." Like I didn't really think anything of it. Worked out together. It got to a point where I wasn't even necessarily like training myself anymore, right? It just got to a point where I was always correcting him, like, "Hey man, you're doing this wrong. Like, hey, like let's do this." So it got to a point where I was coaching him anyway, but then like I realized that I got more enjoyment out of helping somebody else than I did ever doing anything for myself. And that was kind of like the shifting point where, around the same time I hurt my knee again, injured my meniscus. So I'm kind of thinking, all right, I could try to come back, hopefully play at the time I was a sophomore, hopefully play my junior year, or I can figure out this strength conditioning thing and, maybe train basketball players. Like I had no idea that I could make money training people,
Right.
besides a personal trainer. So I'm just like, all right, cool. Like, how can I make this happen? Eventually, like I figured out like there's an internship at the University of South Florida, which is actually where I ended up getting my degree from. So I applied to the exercise science program. I applied for the internship with the men and women's basketball team, and I didn't get it. Right? Like everyone's like, yeah, man, that'd be perfect. Like they denied me. I don't think they emailed me back. So that's how I knew I didn't get in. So at that time, I'm kind of like, I got to figure this thing out. So I'm just like literally on LinkedIn, like sending messages, like message after message, like, hey, can I come watch you? Hey, can I come clean the weights? High schools, colleges, like anywhere, like any facility around. And literally like either I didn't get a response or they'll tell me no. And then one person actually took a chance on me. His name is Mike Butler, who's my mentor. And he worked at Plant High School. He's like, yeah, sure, come on out. Like, we'll have you, we'll have you train the athletes. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I drive out there. He sends me the address. I show up. I'm thinking, oh man, I'm about to work with the football team. I'm going to be working with the basketball, baseball teams, like like the I guess the well-known sports. And I show up and come to find out, he's a strength coach for the crew team.
Nice.
And yeah, so the crew team, for everyone that doesn't know, which I didn't, like everyone, it's like a water sport. So I show up and everyone's in boats, and I was like, oh, maybe I turned on the wrong way. Like maybe maybe I'm at the wrong spot. I see him come out the boathouse, so I'm like, okay. Walk up, introduce myself. He's like, okay, cool. Like 15 freshmen walk in, 15 freshman girls. He's like, all right, I want you to run this session. I'm like, what? He's like, I want you to run this session. And mind you, like outside of training myself and this one other person, I really had no experience like of what I was doing.
Right.
So like I've got like 30 eyeballs on me, and I'm just standing there in front of them. So I'm just like, let's do jumping jacks, right? So like I had no idea what I was doing. I just winged it. It was terrible. I was terrible, and I'm even like going at the end of the day. I'm going back to my car, just thinking, like, man, I just blew my opportunity. I'm already thinking like, all right, well, maybe I can go somewhere else. Maybe I can find somewhere else. And Mike stopped me. He's like, hey man, like that was really good. I want you to come back tomorrow. And I'm like, are you serious? He's like, no, like you're gonna be a really good strength coach. And so like that gave me so much confidence. And even to this day, like I still think about that day. Like that was something that really pushed me and continues to push me to become a better coach and a better person. But he gave me an opportunity. I interned with him, and lo and behold, like he's very good friends with the strength coach over at USF. So like of course, like word gets around. He's like, "Oh, you're interning with Mike Butler." So I get an email from USF, the head strength coach for men and women's basketball and the golf team, say, "Hey, we want you to come in." I go in, get an internship, and then from then on, man, it was like a snowball effect. I started getting internships. I got my first head strength coach position at the age of, I want to say 23. All right, I was working with a baseball facility, and I was in charge. There was no one telling me what to do. I made a lot of mistakes, but I got so much experience from that. And then from then on, man, it was just, all of a sudden, high school team started working with me, and then worked with Lake Erie College, which was my previous job before where I got to now. And it was me and one other coach for 550 athletes. So we were basically like the head guys for the entire strength and conditioning program at the age of 25 and 26. So like we were young, we were pretty much basically like the age of the athletes that were there.
Right.
And then fast forward to now, I'm working with Future Research and also the Oakland Rise basketball club out here. So that's kind of like a long-winded answer, but I got into it just kind of based off of just passion and following my heart, because there was a lot of things I could have done, and also obviously like earn money at the time, but I just knew like it didn't matter. At the end of the day, I wanted to make sure like I followed my passion and my heart. So yeah, man, I'm here now.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to go backwards and ask you a couple
Mhm.
questions about some of the things that you were talking about there, and then we'll move forward into what you're doing now. So I want to first go back to you and your improvement plan as a
Mhm.
basketball player. So you said a couple times, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of unsure, but I knew I wanted to work hard and I knew I wanted to get better. So as you think back to that time when you were trying to become a better basketball player while you were in high school, do you feel like you figured it out a little bit more as you went along? Like, example, when you were a freshman, maybe you had no idea what you're doing, but by the time you were a junior, senior, do you feel like you had figured out maybe not something that would work for everybody, but something that had worked for you?
Yeah, man. And it's funny because like obviously the hindsight's 2020. So now, even now, like I look back and I'm like, man, I still didn't, like there's still so much I didn't know. But no, for sure, there was at the time as a freshman, I was just doing anything I saw on YouTube, right? Like I see, oh man, Kobe Bryant did it, so I can do it, right? And then it's like Kevin Durant did it, and then you look at those guys and the types of players that they are, and over time I realized that all right, well I'm under 6 feet, so I'm probably not going to be, like a Kobe Bryant where, he's able to kind of create his own shot, just rise over defenders. So I need to be a little bit more craftier. I'm not super explosive. So who should I be looking at? So obviously Steve Nash was one of one of the greatest players of all time, but he was also one of my favorite players to watch, just because he was, for who he was actually in my opinion pretty athletic, not like overly explosive, but he was always on balance. Like he was always very smart. He's always scanning the court. So I looked at that as an opportunity to kind of emulate my game after that. And
Yeah,
so I kind of
a
started.
different kind of athlete, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a lot of times we think of athletes as just being the guys who can jump and run, and we don't often think about that balance piece of it and eye-hand coordination and all the things that Nash was good at. A lot of
Hmm.
people might look at him and say, "Ooh, he's not really that great of an athlete," but but all the things that made him great, from eye-hand coordination to balance to stamina. Let's face it, that stamina is something too that I don't think a lot of times people think about as being an athletic talent. But I always used to say that one of my greatest athletic talents was not my speed, was not my quickness, was not my jumping ability. But one thing I could do was I could run harder, longer than the people that I played against. And I always felt like that was an advantage, in that maybe I didn't have that much of an advantage in the first quarter, but in the fourth quarter, I always felt like I had an advantage because I could still be going at full or close to full capacity, whereas maybe some of the people who were, quote, better athletes than me couldn't continue to be at that high level because they didn't have that stamina piece, which I think is something that, if you think about Steve Nash, I think that's another thing that he had. He just seemingly was a guy who never got tired, and that's a huge advantage when you're playing the sport of basketball for sure.
Right, man. And it's like you said, like we have this idea, this stereotype, which don't get me wrong, like the most explosive athletes, like that's eye opening. It's like,
Right.
it's gonna pass the eye test, but there's so many things that go into athleticism. So yeah, Steve Nash was always kind of like a big influence. So but yeah, man, I think over time, like I started figuring it out just by kind of being more I would say intentional about my workouts, not just trying to be tired, but trying to get the most out of the workout. So versus like going in for 3 hours and trying to put in work, I'm like, well, instead of doing that, why can't I condense it to about an hour? Why can't I go for makes instead of just shooting up shots, game shots? And it was just about being more intentional as far as like kind of my preparation going forward as I got older.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at myself, and I'm going to turn 50 here in a couple months, and well, actually, I guess in less than a month. But anyway, regardless of that, I feel like when I was back in school, when I was doing my basketball workouts, my basketball workout pretty much was exactly the same. I'm talking about my skill development workout, not necessarily strength and conditioning wise, but just my basketball skill workout was
Hmm.
pretty much the same every single day. I had one routine I did if I was by myself, and then if I had a partner, I had another routine that I would do if I was working out with somebody. And that was pretty much what I did from the time I was in maybe 10th grade in high school all the way through my college playing career. And now you look at the number of resources that people have to be able to go to find more information. And not that all of it is always good, what you can find on
Hmm.
YouTube or find on the internet. You still have to be a little discerning about what you end up using and what you end up looking at. But there's so many more resources out there for people to be able to find things that can help them to get better. And then I think it goes along with, as we'll talk about here as we get more into what you're doing now, the ability to have somebody who is an expert in the strength and conditioning field and the agility and all those things are stuff that particular area didn't even exist in any way, shape, or form, at least not in a private market. You know, you might have had a
Right.
strength coach, but like I played Division I basketball, and our strength coach was the guy who was the strength coach for the football team. And
Right.
there was nothing sport specific about what we were doing. I think if I went back and really looked and analyzed what we were doing, you'd be like, yeah, I don't think that really applies to basketball. And it's amazing just how much the industry has exploded, and just how you can look at the athletes, whether it's the NBA or you look at high school athletes today, and you look at pictures of NBA players or high school players 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and just the differences in their body because of the improved training and nutrition and just the knowledge that's out there from guys like you that are in the field that have brought just a better approach, a more scientific approach to building a better athlete.
Right, absolutely, and it's funny that you say that because even like you said, even at the Division I level, you'll have strength coaches who are basically kind of working with multiple teams, which not everyone can afford like a personal strength coach for every single team. But like you said, like the athletes that we're getting today are going to be, they're getting more explosive, and now we're starting to get more sport specific. Just because like some of the workouts you do with football players going to be very different from basketball players. They're basketball players for a reason. All right. So like some of the lifts, like like not to get off topic, but like Olympic lifts, like cleans and snatches. I'm not a fan of those for basketball players just because one, they're so long, right? Like the average NBA player is like 6'7", right? And like their arms are gonna be longer than, pretty much like their torsos. So putting them in those awkward positions where they are cleaning and snatching or even squatting, especially with barbell squatting, it's putting them in an awkward position just because like their limbs are so long that it kind of makes it difficult to be getting those positions in the first place. So,
I remember
there's
that
just
well. I remember that well, trying to do power cleans
yeah.
back when I was playing at Kent State. I'm like, what? Oh, this is killing me. I remember just feeling like my arms were going to snap in two. I'm like, this exercise, my body was not meant to do this particular exercise.
Right, man. It's like you look at that and it's like, so I know what the coach is looking for. They're looking for what's called triple extension, extend to the ankles, the knees, and the hips, kind of like
For
when you
sure.
jump up.
Right.
But my thing is, why can't we do that? Obviously, through like a dumbbell jump squat, or
Right.
even a trap bar, which is becoming more popular. Why don't we go through a trap bar jump? It's the same thing, essentially we're getting triple extension, but now you can get maximal intent because now you're not worried about, like you just said, your arm snapping off because you're not thinking about when you're doing cleans. You're not necessarily thinking about getting as much weight up as fast as you can, right? You're thinking about those things, but you're also thinking about like you don't want to die, right? Like you're not trying to drop the weight, you don't want to get crushed into the weight.
For
So now
sure.
if I get a trap bar, I put you in a hex bar, or a trap bar. Now you're in a position where you're not necessarily worried about dropping that load because it's not going to fall down. If you have to drop it, guess what? It just falls at your feet. So like these are like little key things that maybe with shorter athletes, maybe necessarily like they'll be able to go into those Olympic lifts, like especially people with experience in those lifts. But for basketball players, like they're basketball players, they're not professional weightlifters. So let's get them what they need in a way that they can do it the best way possible.
Absolutely. All right. Two questions. I want to look at this from two different perspectives. So you
Hmm.
as a performance coach, when
Hmm.
you're working with, let's say, one specific athlete. So one specific athlete comes to you and says, I want to get faster, quicker, more agile, more explosive. Help me to do that. Describe what that process looks like. And then we'll circle back with when you're working with an entire team of athletes. Let's just say when you were working with the men's or women's basketball program, Talk to me a little bit about what the process is like for designing that program, and then start out maybe by just talking about how you design a program for one individual athlete who comes to you on the, let's say, private market, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Right. So, if you don't mind, I actually start backwards with like the team concept.
Sure.
So like when I didn't have the luxury of getting in groups of athletes, I would pretty much get the entire team at one time. So the thing about that is, so like, let's say you have 12 athletes coming in just for a basketball team. When you have that many players or that many people in the weight room at one time, there's only maybe 1 to 2 people, unless like you have the sporting coaches in there. You know, you're probably gonna have 1 or 2 coaches in there to really kind of go around and make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's really hard to kind of get specific when you have that many athletes in there at one time. So you don't want to make it too general to the point where it's not necessarily specific for the sport, but you can't get too specific for the athlete and their needs. So obviously, like if there's going to be something that's going to kind of push the athlete back because of an injury or something like that, then obviously you'll manipulate the program. But for the most part, you're going to do something that's going to benefit the entire team, because everyone in there is, like you said, or not like you said, but just pretty much like any coach says, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So we're going to have to do something that's going to help the weakest player on the team, but also try to make sure that we can still make improvements for the strongest player on the team. So that can also like kind of be a little bit of an issue. So if you have like a team in there who has freshmen in there, they may not be experienced in the weight room, and a team like with maybe like 4 or 5 seniors, right? So like, how do you kind of get the best out of both groups while making sure that, you know, you're keeping the session at least about an hour and keeping the coaches happy? So when it comes to team sports, you have the input from not only the head coaches, right, but you also have from administration as well. So administration will come in and say like, hey, like maybe not necessarily we like these things that you're doing with these athletes. We don't necessarily want you to clean them, right? Like Olympic lifts. You have the coaches that will say like, well, I want my players to be stronger, so I want to do this. And then you have the aspect of like, how can I get it specific to help each individual athlete as much as possible, while also making sure like you're making the entire team better at the same time. So there's a lot of moving parts in that. So what ends up happening is you kind of get a more general program for team sports, right? Just because it's really hard to kind of nail it specifically down for the individual athlete, because there's so many moving parts involved with that, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. So when you put together a program like that, I'm assuming that you have some of, I'm going to use the term, you have some pet exercises or some pet lifts or some things that you really believe in, that things that you think work for a particular sport that you incorporate into those programs. I'm guessing that you have some favorites that you found to work really well for your athletes that you incorporate into what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and one thing that also like plays a role in, you know, how you develop these programs is space and time. So if you have 12 people in the weight room who are all trying to get the same benefits, and you don't want to necessarily have people dragging, that can also pretty much influence your decision making when it comes to certain exercises. But I do. So for basketball players, you know, I love Bulgarian split squats or rear foot elevated split squat. And one thing I like to do is to manipulate the tempo. So versus just kind of going into the split squat, going up and down, one thing I like to do is to have them drop down into that bottom position and hold. Because a lot of times the basketball players, if people can picture it, they're going to be in this lunging position where they're taking a step forward, they're going to be taking a step backward or to the side. They're going to be in that lunge position. And a lot of times when you have younger athletes, or maybe more inexperienced athletes in terms of strength, they're not going to be able to get at that bottom position. All right, so just putting them through that in a specific tempo, that's going to help build them strength in that specific position. And then you can also manipulate it to the point where you kind of jump up and down. So it's a rear foot elevated jump. So now I manipulate the tempo again and say, I want you to get down and up as fast as you can, and I want you to try to get up in the air. So now it's not only like I'm training strength, but now I can also go to the other end of the spectrum and train power. So rear foot elevated is always going to be my go-to. And then you can also tweak it a little bit, like I said, with the tempo and the speed to get more out of it, depending on what athlete you need.
Head Start Basketball, along with members of the J. Billis Skills Camp staff, will be hosting the very first Prime Skills Camp, an affiliate of the J. Billis Skills Camp that is held annually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prime Skills Camp will take place on the campus of Western Reserve Academy just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, June 26th through the 28th, and will be designed for boys rising to grades 6 through 9. Prime Skills Camp will mirror the J. Billis Skills Camp in daily programming, teaching, coach-to-camper ratio, and quality of instruction. Prime Skills Camp brings all of the team-oriented individual instruction, focus on the fundamentals, and high-level coaching to young men aspiring to a high school varsity basketball experience. This camp is operated by Billis Camp veterans and includes the J. Billis Coaches Development Program alongside the camp, ensuring that the quality of teaching and coaching at this camp is second to none. Please visit headstartbasketball.com or jbilliscamp.com for more information or to get registered. Let's go to the design for an individual athlete where you do have the opportunity to work in a one-on-one setting. You do have an opportunity to get to know that athlete better. You do have an opportunity to focus on them when you're working with them. I'm assuming that your process starts with some baseline testing to give you an idea of where the athlete is when you first get them, and then talk a little bit about how from there you go ahead and design a program. Maybe first tell us what the testing might look like, and then how you go about putting together a program that meets their specific needs.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The first thing you need to do with anything is, or any type of individual that comes to you, is to do an assessment. You need to have a baseline of where they're at. So one of my favorite things, and every basketball player's favorite thing to do, is to test their vertical jump. So I'll test their bilateral vertical jump, which is just jumping off 2 feet. I'll also get their single leg vertical jump, right and left, and then I'll get their approach jump. I'm not really necessarily a fan of mile times. Some people will come up to you, like your parents will come up to you and say, hey, like, I want to improve your mile time. My thing is that when it comes to conditioning the athlete, they're going to get the most conditioning out of their sport that they're playing. So we'll still have some conditioning kind of in there, but I won't necessarily have them run miles, just because like nowadays athletes are playing so much AAU basketball, they're training so much that's honestly going to lead to long-term chronic injuries, just because like there's going to be a lot of repetitive stress on them. But for the most part, it's just going to end up the assessment as far as like the testing. It's going to be their vertical jumps, different in different ways. And then once it comes down to the actual biomechanics of it, there's something called functional movement screen, FMS, and also mix that up with another principle, which is called applied functional science, which basically means that I'm looking at how they move. I want to look at how he moves when he's taking a step. I want to look at how the athlete looks like when he squats down. I want to see what it looks like when he jumps. I want to see how the athlete moves in space when it mimics the same movements that they're making in the sport, and I want to see them with a certain weight, not necessarily a heavy weight, but just seeing like how they move, if there's going to be other forces that are kind of directly impacting them. So it's the same thing when they play their sport. They're not just going to be by themselves playing the sport. It's not going to be a controlled environment. It's going to be chaos. Right? Basketball is just organized chaos. So I want to see what happens to this individual in a controlled setting, but kind of implementing some chaos into the controlled setting at the same time, just to see how they move. And a lot of times you'll notice a lot of basketball players, they just really don't know how to use their glutes. Right? They're very quad dominant. They lack ankle mobility, which in turn leads to a lot of knee injuries. So that's always going to be the number one thing I always see whenever I work with a young athlete or experienced athlete. It's just like you have a lot of mobility issues. And then from then on, that's when you can kind of start seeing, okay, these are going to be some limitations from these mobility issues. They have certain weaknesses here, which leads to certain compensation patterns and moving a certain way that's going to favor another way, which long term is going to lead to injury. And then from then on, once you get that kind of picture and then that baseline as far as strength and power, then you can start implementing exercises that's going to intervene and help them kind of start to even out, but also make sure they're improving their athletic performance.
How much does a conversation with the athlete themselves, or in the case of maybe a young athlete, the athlete's parents, when they think about coming to you with maybe a specific desire, like, hey, I want to get faster, or I want to improve my vertical, or I need to be able to do, how much do you have conversations with the athlete that impact the design of your training program? Or do you find that you listen, you take into account what they're saying, but the majority of what you're doing is based off the science that you're seeing when you're doing that testing?
Honestly, in my personal opinion, and like there are other coaches will feel otherwise, but with me, it's always an ongoing thing, because I always personally believe in the the athlete knowing their body pretty much more than I know them. Obviously, like you said, the science is going to play a role. Like, hey, like this is what we're looking at. But at the same time, if I'm giving the athlete something and they're saying, hey, man, X, like I'm just not feeling right, I'm not going to keep giving the athlete that thing because I can't feel what they feel, right? Even though I know the science behind it and saying, okay, like this is what you're lacking. Here's the exercise I have prescribed for you. If they're telling me like this, that's something that they just feel like is not right with their body, I'm not going to do it, right? And then when it comes to also just talking about, their goals and some desires that they have, and even the parents, right? You want to be able to educate them, but also take in constructive feedback. So obviously, like there's going to be times where, like I said, you're going to have to educate them and say, hey, like this is why we're doing this. But at the same time, just being an active listener. I think some of the best leaders in the field, and even Alan Stein, who you had on as a guest, he talks about the best leaders are always people that are going to be constantly listening, right, and getting that feedback and then making adjustments if necessary. So I think it's a constant thing. I don't think it's always going to be a one-time conversation and boom, right? We have our program, we're going to keep going. There are going to be some days where I talk to the athlete and maybe they just don't have it, right? May not necessarily because they're being lazy, but because something's just not right with them, something is going on in their life. So you have that conversation, you get that information, and then what do you do with it? Am I going to keep going because science tells me this, like this athlete needs to do this, but for whatever reason today they just had a bad day, like they failed their test, they didn't sleep well, they haven't been eating at all the entire week. All right, so like now I have all this science and this information, this perfect program, but in this scenario, it's not going to work with them. Right, so I think it's a constant thing that you're always going to have, getting that feedback from the athlete, getting the feedback from the parent, and you have to make a decision from there. So I think it's kind of flexible. It's kind of a gray area, but for the most part, you want to go with your gut feeling. So I always make sure I have those conversations with all the athletes to make sure I'm making the best possible decisions for them.
Absolutely. I think what I hear you saying, and this is something that I've come to find out from talking to so many coaches here on the podcast, and I think you intuitively know this, but what I hear you saying there is you're building a relationship with that athlete and their family to get a better understanding of what that athlete needs. And by having that being an ongoing conversation, you're able to continuously adapt and adjust what you're doing to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the athlete. And I think any coach, doesn't matter whether you're a sports performance coach or whether you're a sports specific coach, that's what should be happening all the time. You're having those kinds of conversations. You're getting to know your athlete. You know what's going on in their life. You know what's going on in their day. And by doing that, you just have a better handle on what that particular athlete can do on a given day or not do on a given day. And so I think those relationships are really, really important. And it goes across the board. Like I said, sports specific, sports performance, I don't think it really matters. I think the relationship between a coach and their player is really important. I wanted to ask you, as you were talking, I started thinking about sort of the cycles of an athlete going through, let's say, their off season, their preseason, and their season. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy in terms of how you maybe adjust the program that you put in place for an athlete or a team, whether you're in the preseason, in season, and off season? Just talk a little bit about sort of the cycles of the year in terms of an athlete's training.
Yeah, absolutely. So the off season, it depends naturally where the team kind of finishes or the athlete finishes. So obviously, a team that goes deep in the playoffs or their championship, they're gonna have a longer they're gonna have a longer season and a shorter off season versus a team that maybe loses early in their conference tournaments or don't make the playoffs or whatever have you. They're gonna have a longer off season. So typically, what I do is I always give the team or the individual 2 weeks off because they need to mentally recharge, they need to physically recharge. Just because like we don't want to start overtraining them. So as soon as the season finishes, like some players, like they'll naturally just like, man, like depending on how the season goes, like man, I'm ready to get back in the gym. I wanna get back at it. But they need that natural time off just because they need their bodies to recover 100%. That way, when they come back, like their batteries recharge. Because we're not going to do any good if you're coming in half full. We're going to do more harm than good. So I naturally always give them 2 weeks off, wherever they end up. And then after that, so let's say a team has a full off season, they have about a couple months before the season starts. So what I'll do is I'll start building general strength, just because like we want to make sure we're steadily improving that characteristic going on into the season because we're not necessarily going to be able to train that in season. So I start by going off to general strength phase, just kind of like for about 4 weeks, just trying to make sure I'm preparing their body, make sure they're getting different kind of forms of exercises. So it's going to be a lot more variety, going to be higher reps as we get closer to the season. So after the first month, all right, then we're going to go more into sports specific, quote unquote. So now we're going to start training for more power. So instead of kind of giving them a variety of exercises, now we're going to start kind of zeroing in on more specific exercises, maybe like the trap bar deadlifts or jumps, goblet, squat jumps, more training for power to make sure we keep that explosiveness up going into that more preseason phase. So once we start going that for about 2 to 3 weeks, we'll give them another week off. And then that's kind of around the time when they'll start getting back to campus or they're going to have more preseason tournaments going on. At that point, they're going to be spending a lot more time with the sporting coaches or the sport teams. So at that point, we're not going to see them nearly as often. We'll see them most in the off season. And as we get closer to the season and even in season, we're not going to have that much time with them. So at that point, like we had to just maintain basically kind of what we built up to that point. And so like at that point, we'll probably see them maybe 2 times per week at the most, at least in my experience. So at that point now we're just kind of making sure we're hitting our major lifts. Like that's what we're calling going closer to end season. That may be, like you said, like even like Olympic lifts, maybe a couple of accessory exercises. And then from then on, like now we're just going to basically make sure like we keep what we've built in the off season. And then from then on, once the season's over, we kind of repeat the cycle.
In your mind, what's the ideal, I'm thinking just in season, what's the ideal amount of time? And maybe it varies for every team, but just in general, if you could design a program exactly the way you would want it to be, and because we all know that sometimes head coaches of different sports have different ideas of what they think is appropriate or not appropriate. But if you could design it for yourself, how much time would your athletes be spending on the strength and conditioning piece during the season? What would be the ideal program in your mind?
Ideal, man. I mean, honestly, at least 3 times per week.
Okay.
Just because I feel like in my experience, like I've been in situations where I've had athletes who we've had a great off season. You know, we built up a lot of strength, and athletes are explosive, and then we get in season and they don't touch the weight room at all, right? And then we start to see injury because athletes are starting to break down because eventually you're going to start detraining, right? Like, so my favorite quote is, "What you do not employ, you forfeit." So if you're not training, getting stronger or maintaining your strength, eventually you're going to lose that strength. All right. So like in season, you see that a lot, especially with players who maybe are necessarily like more inexperienced or weaker. They'll start to kind of break down as the season goes, just because they're not lifting weights or like they have a low threshold of strength. So now you start to see more injuries going forward. So ideally, I would say at least 3 times, just because they're getting more exposure to the weight room. They're getting more exposure to weights to make sure they're maintaining. Obviously, we can't go for an hour just because they're playing so many games, depending on what level they are, and they're playing a lot of minutes depending on how good that player is and how many minutes they're playing. And on top of that, they got so many other responsibilities, right? Like they've got school, they've got family, they got a bunch of things outside of basketball that's stressing them out. Right. And so like what we do is when they come into the weight room, we're stressing them. Right. We're just adding more stress to them.
Right.
So
Right.
it's like ideally, like we want them to recover. Right. We want them to lift weights, but we also want them to recover. So even 3 days a week, even if it's only 35 minutes, we hit our major lifts. Okay, we're maintaining. Cool. Get out of here. Go sleep. Go take a nap. Go do something. Go outside. Go socialize. Take some of that stress out of your life, or at least manage it. So ideally, I would love to get 3 days a week. I've been in situations where I've had 0. And I've seen both sides of it, man.
I believe it. And I think a lot of that comes down to, I'm sure, the philosophy of the sport coach, whatever that may be. If it's the basketball coach has an idea of what they want or what they've done in the past. And then I'm sure that gets passed along to you. And then you kind of got to go with a little bit, at least, of what the coach is trying to accomplish in terms of the amount of time and days that you're spending in the weight room with the athletes during the season. I wanted to ask you about a question about specialization, because we see and we understand that there's a trend out there, both in youth basketball and in youth sports in general, there's more and more pressure on young athletes to specialize, to, hey, you got to play club soccer year round, or hey, you got to be playing basketball year-round AAU basketball spring, AAU basketball in the summer. You got to play in a fall league. You got to be on your team during the winter. And just talk a little bit about your feelings on sports specialization and what trends you see from a sports performance standpoint and how specialization impacts athletes, especially young athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because I've seen both sides of it, and I'm in favor of it, but if we do it the right way, right? So I think that's why we see, especially in basketball, we see like the Kyrie Irvings, we see Steph Currys, the Trey Youngs, because they're hyper skilled. Like we have not seen this type of skill ever really in the NBA. Like you look back in, like the 80s or in the 90s when Jordan was playing, and they're good basketball players, but they're not, in my opinion, not as skilled as today's basketball players, and that because at a young age, like they've been dribbling the basketball, they've been shooting, they've been watching, Steve Nash, right? Like Steph Curry is literally like Steve Nash on steroids, and then like you get Trey Young, who's been watching Steph Curry, who then becomes who he is, and it's because like at a young age, like they've had trainers, they've been in the gym, like they've been working on that craft. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So with that, it's like you're specializing and you're doing the same things over and over and over and over again, right? It becomes repetitive, and it becomes the same thing happens to your joints and your ligaments and your muscles. So it's almost like you get a rubber band and you pull it the same way over and over and over and over again. Eventually, the rubber band snaps. It just has to, because it's taking all the stress in the same direction in the same places, and same thing happens to their body. You develop compensation patterns. So even when I talked about earlier with basketball players, like having poor ankle mobility. Well, if you really look at it, all of human movement starts from the feet, right? It's the foundation of all movement, right? You have when you take a step, when you walk, when you run, right? Everything travels up from the foot all the way up into the top of your head, all that energy. So even if you look at basketball players, like they have poor ankle mobility, well, now it's almost like you built a house on rollerblades, right? Like nobody would ever build a house on rollerblades, and they have shaky foundations. So one of the things I've seen with early specialization is, pretty much poor ankle mobility, poor ankle strength, which then leads up to pretty much shaky knee foundation, which leads to ACL tears, meniscus tears, any type of catastrophic knee injury. And that's just because like they're doing the same repetitive motions and movements over and over and over again. So even though these athletes are getting super, super skilled, they're becoming the Steph Currys, like they're developing chronic, issues going long term. And so my thing is, as a performance coach, is we have to make sure that we're exposing them to different sports. So it's cool, like absolutely, please, like work on your game as much as possible, but also understand that, as a strength coach or even as just a parent, expose your kid to different sports as well. Like have them play soccer, like have them play football or baseball. They can still make sure like they're training and make sure they're getting their shots up or whatever have you, but make sure they're being exposed to different sports. And if they are going to specialize, like, and that's just die hard what they want to do, I would wait at least until they get into high school, because there was actually a couple studies that the names are not popping in my head at the time of this recording. I'll probably like send you the link, Mike. But yeah, there's some articles out there that even studied like Olympic level athletes. I believe it was for track and field, and they found that the athletes that actually specialized in like track and field early on were not any more suited to be an Olympic level athlete than those who started in high school. So basically, it doesn't necessarily matter when you start. It's just about making sure that when you do start, like you're not starting too early in terms of like being like starting in like grade school and things like that. So when it comes to specialization, I would say like, yeah, go for it, but I would say wait till high school if you are going to do that.
Yeah, my unscientific opinion, Xavier, is that it's really difficult to have an 8 or 9-year-old that specializes when they haven't gone through puberty and you have no idea how big they're going to be, how tall they're going to be, how fast they're going to be, what kind of natural coordination they're going to have after they go through puberty. And I think that's a mistake that I do see parents making. And a lot of times the parents are making that mistake in conjunction with some type of sports program that is encouraging them to have their child participate year round in a particular sport. And I think, I was a kid who I love basketball. The last sport that I actually gave up was tennis, which I think was in 7th grade. But up until then, and even beyond that, you think about just pickup sports like in the driveway or in the backyard, playing backyard football or backyard baseball, which unfortunately in a lot of cases those things don't exist anymore, which is
Right.
I think that's a whole nother discussion. But nonetheless, I think it's important that even for a kid like me who loved basketball all the way up through 7th grade, I was still playing other things. And then ultimately, the choice to specialize was mine. And I think that
Hmm.
that's another area where we get into trouble is sometimes it's not necessarily the kid that says, I want to play soccer year round or I want to have soccer 5 nights a week. It's mom or dad or it's the club team that's kind of pushing that on them. And that's where I think we get into dangerous territory with some of the overuse injuries and some of the things that you're talking about there.
Right.
It's just you put kids in a bad position, especially when they're doing it, as I said before, they get to puberty. I think that the advice that you provided for people as an expert in sports performance, I think is spot on. And hopefully that anybody who's out there listening, who's a parent or if you're a coach or you're a program director, just keep in mind that what's best for our young athletes is to be doing a lot of different sports where there's a lot of different movements involved. And that's what helps to keep them healthy. And then, as you said, ultimately that's going to lead to producing a better athlete who may end
Hmm.
up having the potential to be an Olympic athlete or to be a college athlete or to be a professional athlete. Who knows? But you give the kids the widest net, you cast the widest net when you let them do lots of different things and keep them moving in lots of different ways. And then eventually they're going to find their way to the thing that best fits them, both from a mentality standpoint and from a physical standpoint as well.
Right. And that it's funny, man. Like that's a way better answer than mine anyway, just because you included, the mental aspect of it, which is like eventually if you force your kids to play a certain sport, not even basketball, if you just early, like, specialize them in a sport early on, that's going to lead to burnout, especially
For
if they
sure.
didn't, and they didn't intrinsically choose to play that sport solely. So, I mean, you hear about all the time with athletes, and I've even spoken to athletes about this who are even professional level, where I've spoken to them and said, hey, like, what was your childhood like? And like my dad, my mom, or whoever, it doesn't matter. Like they really pushed me to play basketball, and over time they did it because they had to, right? And then it got to a point where even though they achieved relative success, because they didn't necessarily want it for themselves, it's like, okay, I made it, now what, right? Like they don't
Yep.
have that desire to push themselves. So outside of all the science behind it and all these other things, like it's if the athlete doesn't want it, the player doesn't want it, then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's one of the things that, as a sports parent myself, it's one of the things that I've, I don't know if struggled with is the right way to describe it, but it's one of the things that I've wrestled with over time as I've raised my kids and trying to figure out how do I go about introducing them to sports? How much do I push them? How much do I not push them? And I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research and a lot of thinking about what the right way to do it is. And even with all that being said, you really have no idea if you're doing it right because you can't run the parallel experiment where you do the opposite. So
Right.
I've kind of chosen the track of I've given my kids opportunities to do things and then they either choose to take advantage of those opportunities or they don't. And so I've tried not to push. I've not tried not to be the dad that you described who kind of wants it more for their kid than the kid themselves want it. And so I'm curious as I continue to go along. My son's in 8th grade, just finished his 8th grade season tonight, actually. And
Hmm.
for a long time, he likes basketball, but he hasn't been a kid who really wants to go out and put a ton of work in outside of the confines of his team practice or the things that he does that are, quote, required.
Hmm.
And for the first time, as this season has started to wind down, he started to come to me a little bit and say, hey, I want to start working on this and getting better. And now I'll have the opportunity to be there for him to help him with that. But it's not me pushing that, it's him coming to me with it. And so, again, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but that's kind of the way that I've tried to approach it. And to this point, I feel like it's worked well from both an athletic standpoint in terms of the potential for him burning out. I don't think he's going to be burnt out. And then the other thing that I think, you were kind of hinting at there with the mental side of it, and with, guys that you've talked to who are professional athletes who said, my dad or my mom pushed me into this, and now they get there and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think there's also the potential as a parent to damage the relationship with your child because they resent all the time that you pushed them and forced them to do things that they didn't want to do. So I guess for me, I've always looked at it from a parent standpoint as it's a long game. If I forced him to play basketball 6 hours a day when he was 8, chances are A, he's going to hate the sport by the time he's 12, and B, he's probably not going to care too much for me if I'm forcing him to do something that he doesn't want to do. So to me, that long-term athletic development model, and then also just the long-term relationship between the athlete and the parent. I think for parents out there, it's something to keep in mind when you think about how you're interacting with your child's sporting career. Just remember that it's about your child and it's not about you.
Right. No, absolutely, 100%, man. I couldn't agree more.
All right, so let's go into a couple things that you're doing right now so you can share a little bit of the details. You talked a little bit about working with the women's semi-pro team. So talk about how that opportunity came to pass. Tell us what that opportunity looks like and what you're doing with the women who are a part of that team.
Yeah, man. So it's funny how it happened, but it's just I think it's kind of like a testament to my story. Um, so basically, I was working with a couple players out here. Like I moved out here in November, um, and so I got out here and kind of floated my name around a little bit, and so one thing led to another, to whereas I was working with a player who plays with the semi-pro team. All right. So I started training her, working out with her, which kind of snowballed again. I started working with other players who were part of the team. And I don't even know exactly what was said, but I remember just having a thought in my mind and saying it out loud, like, "Hey, man, does your team have a strength coach?" And she was like, "Oh, no, no, we don't have a strength coach." And so I just kind of said it like as a joke, like, "Oh man, that'd be dope. Like, if I could be a strength coach and with your team." And she was like, "Oh, you should." So I'm like, "Seriously?" She was like, "Yeah, yeah, like we would love to have you." And so I'm like, "No, oh, okay." So I emailed the coach. I was like, "Hey, my name is Xavier Brown. This is my resume. I'd love to be part of your program." And I didn't hear back from him for like 2 weeks. So I'm thinking like, all right, cool. Like, it didn't happen. Maybe sometime in the future, whatever have you. And then come to find out, like one session, I'm training one of the players, and she's talking to me, and she's like, "Hey, yeah, my coach called me, and he was kind of asking about you." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, I put a good word in for you." And then that same day, I get home, and he emailed me back and said, "Hey, I want you to come to this tryout on this day, which is February 1st." So I was like, "All right, cool, like, I'll be there." So go to the tryout. He tells me, "Hey, like I'm gonna give you 20 minutes." So I'm like, "All right, perfect, cool. That's all I need." Just so I show up, I got all my stuff. I'm getting set up. We have like the warm up going. I look back, just kind of looking back to see the time, and come to find out, I got 15 minutes. Right, so he cut my time in half, like not in half, but he gave me the 5 less minutes. So I'm just kind of sitting there, like I had this perfect plan in place. I had this perfect, 20 minutes, like on the dot, and then he kind of just shortchanged it 5 minutes. So like I'm sitting there versus, and mentally I'm just kind of thinking to myself, okay, I could easily kind of panic right now. I could kind of like, fumble, or I can just make the best of this opportunity. So I just did what I could in 15 minutes, didn't even let it phase me. I'm walking off the court, as they're about to start this little training session, and I'm just kind of thinking to myself, like, man, like I wish I had that 5 minutes, like thinking like, man, like maybe I didn't necessarily do it the way I wanted to do it. And then there was other people in there, like a bunch of other coaches. They came up to me and said, "Hey, man, I love what you did. Even though you didn't get 20 minutes, I love what you did." And I'm like, "Really?" And all the coaches came up to me and they're just talking to me about, "Hey, like maybe I could get you to work with my team, this, that, and the other." Afterwards, the coach came up and talked to me and said, "Hey, what's your availability for the season?" So I was like, "Oh man, like this is dope." I didn't necessarily think that it was gonna happen the way it did, just because I felt like, you know, I didn't really have the time to kind of put everything I had out there. But I believe the coach saw something in me. I think this kind of goes back to just always being prepared. No matter what happens, like even if it's 5 less minutes that you thought, I knew I would get my opportunity. I just stayed prepared for it, and once I got it, I just show what I could do.
It goes back to when you were standing in front of those 15 freshman girls on the crew team, right?
Yeah. That was. It's funny, like looking back, it's like that prepared me because it's just like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna fake it till I make it. So now you put me in a position where it's like, okay, cool. Maybe I don't have the ideal situation, but I'll make the most of it. So yeah, absolutely, man.
There's something to be said for being able to think on your feet. And then the other thing that comes to mind there, and this is a theme that's run through a bunch of podcasts that we've done with different guys, but it comes down to you got to do the best job that you possibly can in the moment where you're at now and not be worried
Hmm.
about what's coming next. And if you give your best to the athlete or athletes that are in front of you at the moment as a coach, it doesn't matter again whether you're a strength and conditioning coach or you're a basketball coach or you're a soccer coach, whatever. Doesn't matter what level you're at, doesn't matter who those athletes are that are in front of you. If you're giving your best to them, somebody's going to notice. And that could be the athlete themselves. It could be a parent. It could be somebody sitting in the stands. It could be somebody else who has an even bigger opportunity in mind for you. If you're doing your best in the moment, that is what opens doors. It's when you're sitting there and you're giving less than your best because you think you should be somewhere else or you think you should be given a better opportunity. That's when the opportunities, that's when those doors shut. And I think that
Right.
I found that to be the case. And I know that we've had a lot of coaches on here who have described, people ask them, well, how'd you get to this level where you are now? And I want to get to that same level. And they say that almost to a man, they say, we had to go back and we had to work as hard as we could. When I was a fourth grade basketball coach, I did
Hmm.
the best I possibly could. And then somebody noticed that and gave me an opportunity to coach at middle school. And then I did the best I could with the middle school team. And next thing I knew, I was a JV assistant and so on. And you just move your way up the ladder, not
Hmm.
because you got one eye out the door, but more because you're doing such a good job where you're at that people say, hey, this guy or this woman deserves another opportunity to move on and get bigger and better things moving forward. And so I think there's a great lesson to be learned from that without question. Hey, Hoopheads Nation, check out this new offering from Tyler Whitcomb Basketball Coaching Courses. The Steve Wojciechowski Marquette Playbook by Brian Applin is now available. Wojciechowski is in his 6th season as the head men's basketball coach at Marquette University. Visit coachtube.com/users/Tyler Whitcomb to check out this great resource. Describe what it's like to be working with this semi-pro team. What are some of your responsibilities, some of the things that you're trying to do with them as you get started with this?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's well, the one thing that I've noticed that I've told people is that the level of intensity is just through the roof. Like I've worked with some professional athletes before, but never really in a team setting. So just being at the workout, it was just like it's crazy, like the incredible, like the pace they played, like the way the coach communicated with them, like just off that training session alone. And up to this point, like I've learned so much just be kind of like being around them, talking and things like that. But my primary responsibility preseason and then going into the season is to prepare the athletes to be able to withstand the demands of the sport. All right, so basketball, especially with women basketball players, they're gonna have a lot of issues with their hips. All right, they're gonna be more prone to tear their ACLs just because of things they can't control, like anatomy and hormones and things like that. So my responsibility is to make sure, not necessarily that they're going to be super athletes, but make sure that they can make it to the end of the season, right? And not necessarily in the sense of like we're just going to hobble there, like we're going to finish strong. So I want to make sure that they're always available to play the game that they love playing. I think a lot of times it kind of gets missed. Like we talked about it before, like obviously like jumping higher, things like that. But availability is the best ability, right? I think what makes LeBron James so special is that he's a freak athlete, but he never gets hurt, right? Like even when he like turns his ankle or he falls or anything like that, it's like he's back the next game. So that's something I've really taken to heart as a coach. So that's gonna be my main responsibility. Is like, all right, I don't want anybody to get hurt. And if there is an injury, I want them to come back just as strong as they did and not necessarily have to miss a game. So just making sure that they're prepared, making sure that we're improving their athleticism, and then making sure that they're healthy long term. And they're going to be obviously like I have to wear many hats too. So if they need a rebounder, if they need someone to play dummy defense, like I'm not above jumping in there. right? Even the day of the workout, basically like after I had my 15 minutes, I could have gone home, but I stayed just because like that's something I want to be around. I wanted to help rebound. I wanted to help set up some cones. I just want to be whatever I had to be, like even setting up the shot clock. So right now, I'm just going to be there every day, every practice. Even some of the athletes, I continue to work with pretty much one-on-one personal, like, personal sessions, just because, they just want to get that much better. And so, obviously, like I said, like having 12 players is very different than having one player. I can get more specific with that one player. So it gives me an opportunity to not only help them as a whole, but the players that really, really want to get specific and really dive into getting better at their craft, like I'm able to do that. And I have a couple players who actually have an opportunity to play overseas, so I'm excited to get them ready, get them prepared, and see what I can do.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think one of the things that, as a coach, that's the most satisfying is the ability to impact your players so that they can take their performance to the next level. And I think that's true for whether you're strength and conditioning, whether you're the sports specific coach. I think you're always trying to give your athlete the best opportunity to maximize their potential. And it sounds like that's the opportunity that you've been given. It sounds like an exciting, just, it sounds like it's going to be something that you're going to be able to absorb a lot, and you're going to probably take as much from the job as the team is going to take from you in terms of from a learning perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'm actually excited about too is just having an opportunity to not build the culture because they've already had one, but just kind of adding my own element to it. So one thing I've really been big on lately is just personal development, which um just talking to people. I'm always trying to read and learn things, but having the opportunity to also teach and you know basically kind of tell people, hey, these are my philosophies. This was worked for me, and have them try it out and see them get success, kind of just like you said. To me, like that's everything. So having the opportunity to come into with this team, I'm going to continue to do that. Just kind of leave my own imprint, my own stamp, and like I said, see what we can do together.
All right, from a personal development standpoint, what are some things, some places, some resources that you go to help improve your personal development? Is it podcasts? Is it books? Is it a mentor? Where do you go when you're trying to develop your craft?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's everywhere. Let's see. Like as far as podcasts, I have one person who will for sure, not necessarily just a podcast, but even just like he's everywhere. Dre Baldwin. He's played professional basketball overseas, and now he's turned into a high performance expert. But he's got a bunch of free stuff on YouTube. He's got a bunch of free podcasts on YouTube. He doesn't necessarily specify it just for basketball, but he does talk about the mental game, the mental aspect of life, and which to me is 85% of life. So I think just being able to unlock those mental those mental, I guess, barriers, all right, that stop a lot of us from doing the things that we believe that we can do. To me, like that's just going to make a difference in your life. As far as books, I would say, well, obviously, shout out to Alan Stein. I'm actually reading Raise Your Game right now. But Alan Stein is also a great person too. Like I love anything he has online that's free or any type of books. Definitely, like I would highly recommend searching him out. James Clear is an amazing resource. He actually wrote this book that I just read called Atomic Habits, which kind of breaks down basically like the power of just making small changes in your day to day and how they can impact your life and the decisions that you make long term. So like that's to me like that was one of the best books I've ever read. And he's also got websites available. He's got a ton of articles out there for free that you can easily look up. And then Tim Grover. Honestly, like Tim Grover is probably one of the people that even though you don't necessarily know them, but I consider him a mentor just because he wrote a book called Relentless, and to me, like that was one of my favorite books of all time. It just talks about the same thing, like the the mental aspect of basketball, like Michael Jordan, Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant. Talks about the things that they had and some of like the habits that they had, and how that separated them from everyone else. So anything that has to do with kind of learning more about the mental side of life, I'm always interested in. So those are some great books. Those are some resources that I feel like were huge in my own kind of like personal development. And like you said, it's personal development is always going to be a growing process. So I'm still learning, but those for sure, like I would have to recommend those.
Those are some great mentors. Obviously, 2 out of those 3 guys we've had an opportunity to have on the podcast. Alan was our very first guest on the Hoop Heads pod, and he just came on recently for number 250, and he's become not only a podcast guest, but also a friend, and his stuff is great. And just like you, before I got to know him personally, I listened to all the Hardwood Hustle podcasts. I consumed his YouTube videos and things that he did and tried to incorporate that into my coaching. And so I've been very, very fortunate to get to know Alan over the last couple of years. And he's everything that you see from him or read from him. He's everything and more when you get a chance to know him in person. And then actually Alan was nice enough to connect us to James Clear. And so we had James on the podcast to talk about Atomic Habits. Again, as you said,
That's awesome.
Yeah, just a tremendous book. So James came on for like an hour with us, and it was pretty soon after the release of the book, and went through and talked about all the the great concepts. And again, from a personal development standpoint, whether you're a coach or an athlete, both of those books, Raise Your Game and Atomic Habits, are 2 books that if you haven't read them, as Xavier said, you definitely want to go out there and pick up those 2 books and read them because they're tremendous. And then I have read Relentless, but we haven't had Tim Grover on the podcast. But Tim, if you're out there listening, love to have you come on. Talk
Speaking the universe.
For sure. Those of you who don't know, maybe might be a little bit before your time if you're a younger listener out there. But Tim Grover was Michael Jordan's trainer back when he was with the Bulls, and so 3 great people for sure for you to learn from. Let's jump from that question about personal development. Let's talk about what you're doing with the future, because I think I've spent a little bit of time on their website just kind of looking on what that's all about. So just explain for people, first of all, what it is, how you got connected to them, and then maybe where you see that going in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Future is a new startup that's been around for about a year and some change now going on. But basically, Future is an online training company, which pretty much specifies in getting one-on-one training with high-level coaches. So versus like some of these online training programs where you'll have like maybe, which is nothing wrong, like you'll have a personal trainer and they're working with maybe like 30 or 40 clients, and maybe not necessarily getting that personal one-on-one experience. With us, you're getting paired with literally a high-level coach who some of them have worked, like my boss has worked in the NBA. We've had a couple of people that have worked in the NFL, the major leagues. You're basically getting access to us pretty much any day of the week, all right, and pretty much like almost any hour of the day. And so a lot of times with we've heard through other companies or other people that have been with other companies, they told us that one thing that really separates us is just the connection that we give our clients. So a lot of times, like when you do finish that workout, you're not necessarily getting a coach that's, coming in, chiming in and asking you, hey, how was the workout? How did you feel? Things like that, giving you valuable feedback. A lot of times they'll just finish the workout and it's like, all right, you get a thumbs up and cool, like you're gone. All right, but with Future, it's just like that constant connection. Like literally right now, like if you message somebody, like you might get a response in about 20 to 30 minutes. Just because like we're making sure that we develop those relationships and maintain those relationships. And so it's pretty much the most personal experience you can get with an online training program. The great thing about it too is that, you don't necessarily just have to message through the app. You can also, like, we do FaceTime assessments. So like our first call is always going to be FaceTime. You can always schedule them whenever you want to call your coach, whenever you want to talk to them. We never would give audio cues, like versus just listening to like a robot voice or like a generic voice give you cues. If you were my client, like you would literally hear my voice giving you cues. So it'd be like, hey, Mike, like we're going to sit back on our heels for the squat. Like you would hear me say that. So it's pretty unique just because it's almost like I'm there without being there. And I don't think a lot of training companies can do that when it comes to online training, or they haven't done it yet. So it's something really special, man. Like in the future, like I for sure seeing this scaling a lot more, having more coaches, and then just being available in every city to the point where now I believe honestly we might not even just have just online training. We'll also have in-person training as well at a certain different facilities. So you can obviously get that online training aspect of it. But then if you're like, hey, I want to meet up with coaches, which we've actually had in the past, You can come in any city you want and actually meet your coach if you're in the same city or same state. So it's a really unique experience, man. It's very different from what I'm used to, like strength and conditioning, being there constantly. Um, it's something that's new. It's something that I believe in, but yeah, man, it's just giving us the opportunity to help as many people as you possibly can around the entire world.
Yeah, it looks very cool. It's a very interesting idea. I love the idea of entrepreneurship and coming up with new ideas. And this is one that when you and I got connected and I started looking into your background and looking at the website and just looking at the concept, I'm like, oh, this is really cool.
Hmm.
Tell me what it looks like from your end of it. So when you have a client, tell me what does it look like from the back end, from your side of it? How often do you have to be available? Just explain the process if somebody is on Future and they're working with you as their personal coach. What does that
Hmm.
look like from your end of it? You kind of described what it was like from the user end of it. What's it look like
Hmm.
from the coach end of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, like we're human beings too, so we have to sleep and eat and things like that. But I'm always honest with my clients that, hey, look, I'll be pretty much available, very like under 20-minute response times from pretty much 8 till about 4:30, 5 o'clock on Pacific time. And I have maybe one or two East Coast clients, so that's the only time where the time difference is really going to affect us. But I'm always honest, like, hey, like if you need to reach me between these hours, like, I'm going to be available pretty much in under 20 minutes. Outside of that, I'll still be responsive. It just won't be necessarily as quick. Um, but from the back end, like I can see everything. Obviously, I can see when a client does a workout, when they skip stuff, um, when they do something and they just whatever for whatever reason, like they just change the weight on something and say they lifted something, and I can see like they actually didn't do it. Um, it's pretty intuitive. So on our end, we can basically see anything that not the athlete, but the individual does because one unique thing we do is we actually send out Apple Watches, not to keep, but a free Apple Watch to use with the app. Just because like pairing that with the app makes the service that much better because now you don't have to really have your phone in your hand. You can actually just kind of go off the watch. Um, but as long as they have that watch on, like we can see like their heart rate going up. We can see like when they're coasting. Like we can see these things, right? And sometimes I'll have clients that will say like, "Hey, yeah, that workout was really tough," and I'll go in and I'm like, "You just sat on the first exercise for 30 minutes, so you didn't do anything." So it's pretty funny like seeing that. But
Do people try to get away with that twice?
No. Once you catch them the first time, they're like, "Oh crap! All right." Like, so maybe they'll like fake squat or something, like get their heart rate up a little bit. But
That's funny.
yeah, but yeah. I mean, it's a really unique way to make sure we hold our clients accountable, and instead of like versus like kind of being there in person, like feeling like oh like we're inspecting them or making sure we're evaluating them, like they think they can get away with it because we're not there. But in actuality, like we're pretty much still there. I don't tell them how I know, all right, but I know. I can just say, hey, like you did this, whatever, and for whatever reason they don't know. Um, but um, but yeah, man, it's just on on our end, it's just a lot of programming, being flexible. Um, Whenever like a client says, hey, like I can't make it to this workout today because I'm going out of town. By the time they take off on that plane and by the time they land, like I'll have a new workout for them just because it's supposed to be like that flexible, that um, convenient for them. And obviously, like in an ideal world, like people would hit every single workout every single day of the week. But things happen, and so we pride ourselves on being creative and being flexible with the workouts. That way, like we're still making sure that they're getting that daily deposit of physical activity, but also making sure like it fits their schedule and their needs.
That's very cool. I think it's something that you look at the amount of businesses and services and things that have gone online, and I think this is just one more thing that
Mm-hmm.
by being able to connect with people through the technology is a trend that I think it's not going away. It's only going to continue to accelerate as we get artificial intelligence and the technology continues to get better and better. I think you're going to see more and more services continue to go online. And it seems like it's a very, very exciting opportunity for you to be able to kind of get out on the ground floor of what could end up being a very, very big business. And I'm sure it's something that you're finding to be very, very exciting. We're coming up on about an hour and 15 minutes here, Xavier. So I want to give you a chance to share with people how they can reach out to you if they have questions, if they want to train with you and they're in your area, or they want to train with you on future. Let them know how they can find you. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and we'll wrap things up. And also, if you have any other things that we didn't talk on, if there's one more thing you want to share, please go ahead and do that as well.
Yeah, man. If you want to get in touch with me, probably the best way is probably going to be through Instagram, just because that's pretty much where I'm active most of the time. So my Instagram is actually the Sports Geek. So it's TheSportzGeek. I couldn't get the second S because someone took it, so I had to go with the Z. But the Sports Geek is going to be my main form of contact on Instagram. I also have a Twitter as well. It's going to be X, the Sports Geek. So literally the Sports Geek, you just put the letter X in front of it. You can also find me on LinkedIn if there's maybe some business professionals or some other strength coaches who would love to talk shop. You can easily find me on LinkedIn as well. Just type in Xavier Brown and you'll be able to find me pretty easily. And outside of that, those will be the main social media forums I'm going to be on. And as well as like my website as well too, www.gritandgrind.net. If you would like to go on there and, check out some articles I've written, listen to some other podcasts that I've done, or even just book a session with me, that would be the best way to go about it. And one closing thing I would like to say, well, just for you really, Mike, is just thank you so much for this opportunity of bringing me on, giving me a platform to kind of talk about the things that I do, why I believe it's important, and just my philosophy. So I really appreciate this, man.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. I think that you brought a tremendous amount of value to our audience in terms of thinking about how we go about, especially as basketball players, making sure that we're designing programs and we're thinking about our strength and conditioning in the right way. And so I think it's important to have that knowledge base be out there for our audience. And we can't thank you enough for being willing to spend some time with us. And if anybody's out there and you're looking or you have sports and conditioning questions, Xavier's a great resource to be able to reach out to. And I know he's going to be really responsive, just like he is on Future. He'll get back to you. He'll get back to you right away. And he's doing some great things. And I think he's going to continue to do great things as he moves on in his career. So Xavier, we can't thank you enough for being a part of it. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Registration is now open at headstartbasketball.com for this summer's Head Start basketball camps. We'll be hosting camps for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 throughout the greater Cleveland area. Get registered today and make sure you hit the courts with us this summer.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.